1410, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining our show. We have some important topics to discuss today. With me today, I have my superstar panel, back from recent illness, Attorney Vanita Banks. Thank God we're able to have her again today. And then, of course, former U.S. Assistant Attorney Marlon Prime. There's been a lot of things on the news lately, and there's some things that are quite disturbing, and there's so many big issues like Black women unemployment is getting out of control. But the most immediate thing is that we see on TV front and center the occupation of military forces in the District of Columbia. Now, the problem with that is way back in 1878, the United States government passed what is called the Posse Comitatus Act. And that generally bars federal troops from participation in civil law enforcement, except when expressly authorized by law. This almost 150-year-old law embodies what is the American democracy. You have a separation of church and state, but also at no point in American history are you permitted to use the military against American citizens. Marlon and Vanita, look like we've gone haywire. In DC, if you had kids, Marlon, are you concerned?
Yes. Well, hey, good morning, everyone. I'm very concerned. I have two adult children that are in Washington, D.C., and they're young people, and they're very concerned because the National Guard is roaming around. A number of them are in camouflage and just randomly asking for IDs. So the concern is that the National Guard, they do other things during the course of the week. This is not their full-time job. And many of them may not even have a law enforcement background. And so they're not trained in de-escalation. So I'm just concerned that, these National Guard may overreact, and we may have, a situation that we're not able to take back. It kind of reminds me of Kent State University, which is a university in Northern Ohio, where the governor deployed the National Guard. And, the aftermath, as many of you all know, a number of people got shot. And then when you just look back at these types of issues, it just goes back to the circumstance that these people are not trained. They may be good people, they may come from different backgrounds, but they're not really trained to do that. And then finally, Nathaniel, they need to be working in concert with local government. It shouldn't be a takeover. It should be in concert because if, no one understands who's running what, the federal government saying one person's in control of the police department, then DC is saying another person's in control. So it really doesn't help the residents if the frontline police officers don't know who to report to or what the procedures are.
Well, Attorney Banks, what concerns me about this is two things. One, if you have National Guard members who are infantry, which a lot of them should be, infantry soldiers have the same training as military. Infantry, they teach you to do one thing, to kill people. From time you go into the basic training, you exercise your whole focus. You cite the 10 articles, military training. I will fight for my country to my death. I regard my post to my death. You say that every day in part of the military training. So you're taught to kill people. And only one day do they spend on safety and first aid when I was in the military. So it's shocking to me. But my problem, though, and this is what I'm concerned about, this is make-believe theater whereby we have an out-of-control president of the United States create what is a make-believe theory that crime is out of control. So what they're doing is that they show African Americans and somehow they're catering to racial stereotypes in order to energize their base. And I'm concerned about that. We see this global attack on DEI, affirmative action, and the net effect that we've seen high numbers of unemployment, particularly of African American females. So this whole thing is make-believe. There is not no out-of-control crime in D.C. It's just something that's made up. Same thing as in, now when we did have out-of-control crime, Attorney Banks and and Prime, is when we had people on January 6th attempted to overthrow the government. They all got pardoned. So this is all make believe stuff. It's just irritating to me, Attorney Banks, quite frankly.
Absolutely, Attorney Lee and Primes. I agree with you wholeheartedly. There absolutely is no emergency in DC that would justify the deployment of 800 National Guard troops. There's no crime emergency in the nation's capital. In fact, I believe that and have read statistics that crime is down. It's the lowest that it's been in DC for, I thought I read 30 years, but crime is substantially down in DC. And I agree also, of course, with Attorney Primes, who stated that there necessarily has to be local and federal collaboration and cooperation. And as you stated, Attorney Lee, there's no emergency in DC. There was an emergency on January 6th, but the president did not call the National Guard, and there's just no justification for the government seizing the DC Metro Police Department or this dangerous, potentially very dangerous militarization of the District of Columbia.
You know, I thought from a historical standpoint, this Posse Comitatus Act back in the 1800s, the white supremacist southern states didn't want the military because they want to lynch and kill blacks. And so they want no part of the military. So they passed this law, as I recall, to protect white supremacy originally. And so now we have this law in place that have some criminality component to it. And it'd be interesting whether or not this Congress we have any spine. I mean, we have out of control executive branch of government, and we're slowly but surely going towards a totalitarian regime and without constitutional boundaries. It just, where do you stop? Now, what happens when the guard shoot and kill a civilian? Invariably, I can't imagine something bad not happening. This is not the type of process that could lead to any good outcome. I just don't think it can.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the concern is that we have one party rule in Washington, D.C., whereas the Republicans have occupancy of the White House plus the House and the Senate. So typically what should happen is that, the House or the Senate would be conducting hearings, calling witnesses, asking questions. But we're not seeing that, unfortunately. And that just really kind of goes to the importance of the midterms and making sure people are registered to vote and just understanding that there needs to be some pushback and backstop. And we can't get that if we have a one party rule.
And this again speaks to the importance of voting, and we have to be singularly focused on the midterms. And we ask the question, okay, what can we do? The NAACP, for example, is holding voting town hall meetings across the country in preparation for the midterms. We have to ensure that we are educating, mobilizing, and ultimately turning out the vote during the midterms by identifying and electing candidates that have a record of and that are committed to addressing those community issues that are important to our citizenry. And so we just have to be very, very focused on turning out the vote and just educating people that voting, there are two fundamental obligations of citizens, in my opinion. The first is to the importance of exercising your fundamental right to vote, which many have died for to obtain. And then the second one is to, if you are called to serve on a jury, that as a citizen, you have the obligation to do so.
Okay, we'll have Imhotep chime in today. I know you got some interest to get off your check today, Imhotep. What's going on?
Good morning, my esteemed legal professionals. We really appreciate you all.
Are you concerned about the military taking over D.C.?
Yes, as a veteran of the United States Air Force, an honorably discharged veteran who served with distinction, I don't like it. I want to hear more from the veterans. And before I get to my point, I'm throwing it out there right now. You're a veteran. You speaking out. I want to hear more from the veterans. Where are the veterans? Black veterans I'm hearing or looking on social media and hearing some discourse from black veterans, a few white ones, but for the most part, we've had these Bundy groups, and you talk about these militias and things who were born out of white veterans who did not like government intrusion or were distasteful with the government. Then where are they? Because this is a definite infringement upon the very liberties and freedoms of a citizen. We have a military saying, if you as attorneys might know, that I may not like what you say, but I would defend your right to say it. That's generally what most military people would tell you. I may not like it, but I'll defend it. And so that should be the first start. These veteran groups, the veterans that we know of, they should be defending the liberty and the freedom and what the Constitution allows all of us citizens to live under. And I don't hear much as I should be from hearing from them. A couple of things with you, Nate, or any of y'all. The Texas situation going on. Okay, we got a ruling from Louisiana Thursday. I think I either read it Thursday or Friday morning, where the federal judge declared that Louisiana had improperly eliminated those black districts and had to go back and redraw them. Would that precedent help buffer what's going on in Texas and in the other states, even in California, since Gavin Newsom is hollering about retaliating? And then number two, I was in D.C. for a week earlier this year. And then last
let me cover that. Mm-hmm. That's an important point you just made about that Texas and California, so people can understand what's going on. In Texas, the president of the United States contacted the governor and says, I need 5 more congressional seats. Now, in order to do that, I want you to redraw the map, even though we do it every 10 years, to create districts, boundaries by gerrymandering to create 5 more congressional seats. So in American history, basically, this typically don't occur in a democracy. You know, we have a pattern of conduct. We have census every 10 years. And the censuses are important because you take the total population of the United States of America, you divide it by 435, you get a statistical average of the population. And then that's how you determine the number of congressional seats, folks. So congressional seats are based upon the gross population of the United States of America. So what's wrong with this idea is that you can possibly know to a scientific certainty what the gross population is, so you can put the finite number in to show what each district should contain. Now, so I had some comments from people when California Governor Imhotep was complaining, and so he said, "To heck with this. We can do the same thing in California." And I don't think most people understand what this is all about. Ultimately, this will result in litigation, right? And a lot of people feel that the U.S. Supreme Court is biased in favor of the current administration. So in order to counteract that procedural advantage, if you do the same thing in a Democrat-controlled state, then the Democrats could actually generate more votes because California has over 40 million residents, so they could create more Democrat seats. If Texas do 5, California could create 7. Now, so what should occur is what they're doing should be determined to be illegal. But if
which is what happened in Louisiana the other day. with the
Well, it
ruling
should
that came
be
out of the
illegal,
weekend.
but
Well,
you need to
well,
have insurance. The insurance is that if we do it in the blue states, then if they somehow said this is legal, then we need to have a backup plan, which makes sense to me.
And
Go ahead.
and the horrible thing about what's happening in D.C., he's targeting Democratic cities. I suspect. Well, we saw. I listened to Brandon Johnson's whole speech the other day, and kudos to Brandon Johnson. He's not taking it down. I didn't like Mayor Muriel's first response. I definitely didn't like the chief of police in D.C. She's capitulated, just like the mayor in Orlando did. The black mayor in Orlando capitulated down there and gave up power to DeSantis. Them. I mean, black faces in high places mean nothing if you're not going to stand for liberty and justice, which King said. Either you're going to stand for what's right or you just need to quit. And that's what Colin Powell did, a distinguished four-star general. He didn't like what went on with the Iraq lie and the weapons of mass destruction, and so he quit, a four-star general. So if you black faces in high places mean nothing if you're not going to stand for the rule of law. And so what happens with what he's targeting these Democratic cities is it's a distraction. But for the most part, a list came out the other day from the Midas Touch of where the highest murder rates in the country. And guess where they occurred? In red states. Mississippi was number one with the highest murder. Attorney Banks, Chicago wasn't even on the list. As far as even Illinois and Chicago wasn't even on the list. Mississippi was there. Arkansas was there. Louisiana, Alabama, those red states, Georgia, Tennessee, those red states that he hasn't sent one troop to. So no one, I asked this question the other day, and I'll leave you with this. No one has been shot at or unalived yet. I have to use the word unalive because of social media, so I'm used to saying unalive because they'll black you. So no one has been unalived yet from the guard. But when did that happen? We saw people in D.C. going on porches, people in their private residence sitting on porches smoking. The guy was smoking a cigarette. He was not smoking marijuana, which marijuana is legal in D.C. So that's a catch-22 because Trump just said he wants to declassify it. But anyway, they're going on porches, harassing people. Now, we have a Fourth Amendment, a Fifth Amendment, an Eighth Amendment. We have all these constitutional rights. This is where I drag back to the veterans, the 40 or 50 million veterans in this country. How do you sit by and let this happen when you sat there and got mad at President Obama, bun these people out west about free so-called government land and wanting to shoot your own ATF agents over some land when you should be even more upset at the very constitutional rights that your citizens have been denied. I'm calling on the veterans, man, because January 6th was 15,000, they said, with the January 6th. About 9,000 of them were so-called veterans. Remember that, people. A lot of people in D.C. were veterans and police officers. That's why I say when the people say, well, it's good cops, where are they at? Because if you don't speak up when you see wrong, then you're not a very good person at all. And thanks for taking my call.
Well, Attorney Banks, what were you saying?
Do we, I guess I have the question because, of course, there's a distinction that you alluded to, Attorney Lee, regarding redistricting and racial gerrymandering. And so redistricting, as you determined or as you stated, occurs following the census that takes place every 10 years to ensure that there is a fair representation based on population. And every 10 years, you have an opportunity to see if there have been population shifts that warrant redistricting. And I understand that in California, they had assembled or enacted, if you will, a redistricting commission that was established on a bipartisan basis to make these types of determinations. On the other hand, racial gerrymandering is when you withdraw those districts in a way that discriminates against voters, ultimately with respect to their fundamental right to vote. And sometimes they call it packing and cracking, where you, based on race, concentrate voters in a single district to ensure that they have fewer or less representation in elected office. And then cracking refers to splitting up voters in disparate um, districts in order to dilute their vote. And so I'm hearing people say that what's occurring in Texas is the same as what's being threatened by Governor Newsom in California. In your view, is it really the same? Or do we have these elements of redistricting versus racial gerrymandering that's at play?
I've not looked at the Texas legislation, but here's the problem that I see. If you were to take population estimates, it's going to be somewhere in the United States of America, somewhere between 340 to 350 million people in the country, somewhere in that range, I guess, depending on what statistic you look at. So your congressional district, as a point of beginning, could be somewhere between 780,000 to 800,000 residents per district. So how do you determine the number of person in the proposed congressional district if you don't know what the population is today in that district? So on the surface, this is bonehead ideology in the sense that you could form a district that have 600,000 and one that have 1 million. Because if you don't know what the population that is in that district, right now, we've seen a mass exodus of a lot of people in our country. When you watch the news, you see in the fields of California, people are fleeing. You see in Nebraska, you see nobody showing up for work at these farms, Attorney Banks and Prime, because those people are fleeing. Are they in hiding, or are they going back to Mexico? And so the point I'm making is that you can't have accurate analysis for these congressional districts without population data that's accurate. And so this whole thing is a big farce, and it's quite frankly, it's undemocratic what they're thinking about trying to do. And I think it's a bad omen, because now we're saying the politicians now get to choose their voters versus voters selecting politicians. And that's
one of the
yeah, go ahead.
One of the best commentary I heard was from my pastor this past Sunday sermon, and he was basically saying that a lot of what's going on in Project 2025 and what's going on now is really about 2045, when there's going to be a demographic shift. Where minorities will be in the majority. So it almost seems as though there's a setup for minority rule by improperly picking your voters, and not vice versa. So it's something I think that we truly need to be concerned about. And then the other thing that's really interesting is that remember all the tumult during the time of President Obama was in office about him being a dictator. And all he was trying to do was make sure everyone has health insurance, and people thought that was dictatorial. And we see those same voices not saying anything when all the things that are being done by the administration in terms of firing somebody that's providing accurate information in terms of just job data, taking over universities, cutting Medicare and Medicaid. So it's really disconcerting. And so since we're not getting that, I think it's just really important for our listeners to make sure that you're educating yourself, you're educating others, and more importantly, that you're registering to vote. And really adjusting, because there could be a circumstance where they change your voting district, or you have to be careful of you not being purged from a voter roll. Keeping close attention to those particular issues are very, very important.
And we're seeing in those jurisdictions and states where this racial gerrymandering is occurring, that the states are enacting, and we've discussed this, and we need to continue to focus and emphasize the fact that these voter suppression laws have been enacted in these states um, to prevent citizens from exercising their right to vote. For example, the voter ID laws, um, some states are not allowing online voting. Attorney Primes just mentioned the purging of voter rolls, not allowing physical, voting boxes, and other voter suppression tactics are being employed to prevent citizens from exercising their fundamental right to vote. And we're going to see this continuing to increase. And that's why we need, and there's nothing wrong with the terminology. We've got to push back on this a weaponization of terminology like being woke. Citizens out there, we need to be awake regarding these things that are happening in our communities to suppress our fundamental right to vote.
Well, yeah, one of the hallmarks of the civil rights movement was the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and it's steadily been eroded. As we saw Attorney Banks and Attorney Lee, during President Obama's term, there was an eroding of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And what that entailed, your listeners should know, is that states that had a history of discrimination had to get pre-clearance, and that was basically determined to be unconstitutional. Now, we have another clear and present danger. The Supreme Court, may very well outlaw Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And that's a case that's on the docket for this term of the Supreme Court. And the problem that would present is that the reason this Section 2 was enacted because you had attempts to prohibit, African Americans and others from voting. You had, grandfather clauses. You had shutting down precincts. You had intimidation. You had questions about, hey, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? A lot of different factors that were put into place, and the impact was the fact that you would have large numbers of African Americans that were denied the right to vote. And it just kind of goes to the question that we've been talking about, that there is an attempt to sanitize and limit the pool of voters so that they can get the voters that they want and stay in office, despite the demographic shift. So it's something that we really need to be concerned about and really need to keep our eye on closely. I believe that case is on the docket in October. And I just think, again, it's just important to educate ourselves and understand the significance of the Voting Rights Act, the changes that brought about. We had record numbers of African Americans that were elected, and the Congressional Black Caucus, the numbers expanded. We have to remember the history that the prior Supreme Court in the 1800s, they overruled the 1875 Civil Rights Act, and that ushered in the era of Jim Crow. And your listeners should know a congressman by the name of George White out of North Carolina. He was one of after these legislation was passed, he was one of the last African Americans that was in Congress. And he, had a famous speech that, hey, we're down, but we're going to rise like a phoenix. We got to make sure that this history is not repeated. And we just need to educate. We need to protest. And we need to make sure people are aware that here's what the history is. And we need to make sure the history is not repeated.
And many people feel that the case that Attorney Primes referenced, the Shelby versus Holder case, effectively gutted, or was a major impetus, if you will, in the gutting of the Voting Rights Act by the Supreme Court declaring that the preclearance section, which required that states that had a past history of racial discrimination, that they had to receive preclearance before they could change their voting um, laws. And so, as Attorney Prime stated, this the Voting Rights Act, through the case that he just references on the docket this October, we should pay particular attention to, because it may go even further to erode those voting rights that so many people fought so hard, and many died to ensure that we had an equal opportunity to vote. And again, we're seeing these states enact voter ID laws, closing polls, um, uh, eliminating online voting and early voting. And so we just have to be very sensitive to these attempts that are being made, and keep in mind that 2015 was the first year that more minority babies were born in this country than white babies. And so this is a desperate, attempt to that we're seeing through so many efforts to have, and we just have to call it out, minority rule of our country.
And we saw that minority rule in the pre-civil rights. That's the reason why we had the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of '64. So go ahead, Nathan. I'm sorry.
And these absolutely, Attorney Primes, and these desperate, actions are occurring and through these illegal executive and unconstitutional executive orders, as we are seeing that our nation has become increasingly more diverse.
Well, what we're seeing, though, by this administration is racial polarization. So I talked to many of my white friends who are upset about what the administration is doing, and they have figured this out. They say that what he's doing is appealing to white folks' evil side. That is, that if you are not doing good, but the black guy is doing a lot worse, then you're happy. And it's just an insulting type process in order to govern the country. And so, but it made me look at history in terms of, like, in this city of Indianapolis. Back in 1983, I had this discussion with a good friend of mine on Friday about the mayoral race in Indianapolis. Now, this is off topic just a sec, but I want to show you what happened. We had a guy named Ted Wilson ran for mayor of the city of Indianapolis back in 1983. And at that time, a guy named John Sullivan beat him in the primary, because at that time, Indianapolis had this slating process, and the white guy got slated. And in the primary election, Ted Wilson got 13,000 votes and Sullivan got 15,000. And then, and the reason that Wilson lost is that black voters didn't come out in a fair numbers in order to win the primary election. Well, the problem, though, we got is that all these issues we're dealing with today, there's a direct correlation between the failure to participate in the electoral process in the 2024 election. Now, we're seeing the adverse effect of all the folks that stayed at home who didn't vote in these close state elections. We will win all these states if we get people, like particular black folks in the community, to get out and vote. You can't vote at 50% level in these elections anymore. We have to try to get our number up to like 95%. If we could do that, then these elections can change the course of American history. Right now, we're seeing a rapid decline in rights of minorities. For example, we've seen a significant reduction in black women in the workforce. I was looking at these statistics, Attorney Banks and Ryan. Black folks make up 12% of the federal workforce, right? And so the problem with that, black women rather, and their unemployment rate of African-American women is going way up. And I was looking at certain states like Michigan, it's up to 10%. So we're seeing a direct adverse consequence of voter lack of participation. The administration attacks affirmative action and DEI, and then we see the adverse effect, although they're attacking something that's false. Like you look at executive position in our country, blacks are on 1/12 of what whites are. So we're not made enough progress in order to attack us. It's not like you go to, if you take any university and go to the graduation at the advanced graduate level, the masters and PhDs, I would go there with my kids. I would only see my kids be the minority graduate. There would be no other blacks. It was just insulting to me. So the point I'm making is that we can solve these problems by having a plan. And maybe what we need to start doing is having voter participation town halls start this year. I think we got to do something to change the trajectory of what's going on in our country today.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Attorney Primes.
Go ahead, Attorney Banks.
Well, it's devastating to hear the statistics that in the last 90 days, almost 320,000 Black women have lost employment and or left the workforce. And some of the attributable factors are, and one of the major ones is as a result of job losses in the federal government, the cutting in government jobs, which was a pathway to the middle class for many African Americans as a result of that disastrous disastrous and failed DOGE effort. There's also a shifting labor market where we're seeing that the labor force participation of Black women has fallen below that of Latinas for the first time in many, many years. And so it's suggesting potentially a broader shift in the overall labor market. And we know that African American women are the backbone of our economy and our labor force. They're the most highly educated and hold the most college degrees. And so their losses in the labor market will be devastating to our economy.
Yeah, without question. And I think the thing that I think your listeners need to understand about this whole initiative regarding DEI, anti-DEI efforts, is that the reason why they were enacted is because historically, African Americans that had higher education were not getting job opportunities. So when Lyndon Baines Johnson enacted an executive order regarding the federal government, that's when they started opening up the doors. It wasn't saying that people were unqualified, but it was basically casting a wide net. And as a consequence, there were people of color through their own efforts and their hard work were able to get promotions and advance through the system. I remember hearing a lot of stories from attorneys that, were practicing law or professionals before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And it was common that you would have African Americans with advanced degrees working at the Postal Service because nobody else would hire them. So I think we need to get the message out that, hey, affirmative action, DEI is not trying to put the finger on the scale to unfairly benefit. It's trying to make sure the playing field is fair, that we have a policeman, so to speak, in the workplace that's making sure that, people are not being prohibited from joining the workforce. And the other thing I'll say finally is that, you look at this anti-DEI efforts, no one says anything about the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, who didn't have a background in education before getting the job, or Pete Hegseth, who's the Secretary of the Department of Defense, wasn't a major general or anything of that sort. That's the concern when we talk about DEI, that people that necessarily do not have the same statistics are going to get placed over those that are, more qualified, particularly people of color. So it's something that we really need to pay close attention to. And it's another reason why, it's just so important that we get engaged and participate in this upcoming midterm election.
Okay, let's go to the caller. Caller, go ahead and unmute now. Caller, you have a comment for us or a question? You're on mute, caller. Wait a second. Okay. Hello? Well, I can't get them to unmute. While
And we can't.
Go ahead, caller.
As we're waiting, there's the caller.
Yeah, go ahead. What's your question or comment?
This is Guy calling. I think what we have you're looking at kind of a continuum, in my opinion, in terms of equality between, say, blacks and the majority, so-called majority race of people, as the minority, the blacks, get more and more opportunities, then the majority might tend to think that they're getting too many opportunities. And I think that's kind of where we are. Unfortunately, the most black people, I think, don't feel like we're at parity, but maybe most members of the majority feel that we are at parity in terms of equality, a level playing field. And I think that's where we are right now. And I think we have a president in the White House that's taking advantage of that to the ultimate degree. But as you say, it's going to be up to those that don't feel one way or the other to vote their opinions. That's what it's going to come down to. And I think that if we base on skin tone as the criteria, then we probably are still in the minority. But if we base on ideas and correctness and truth and that kind of thing, I think we'll have a better chance in terms of collaborating with the people of the United States.
Well, here's a deal, statistic you need to know, caller. According to World Population Review, United States of America have 813 billionaires, 813. Out of 813, how many you think are black?
Not many.
That's the point.
If any.
Yeah, so, but even the ones we have, like the Michael Jordan or Oprah Winfrey or Johnson and what's his name, the less than 10, the problem is their combined net worth is only a fraction for the top people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. So the point is that even though they're giving this rhetoric, we just don't have the wealth in our community. We're not the beneficiary whereby we've gotten people super rich. Very few folks in our country have reached that status of color. And so the problem we're dealing with now is this racial stereotyping by turning people against African America just flat out wrong. It's not based on any statistics, it's based on racial bigotry.
Absolutely. But like I say, this is, you're looking at perception, and we have a person, it's up to leadership to do the right thing. But when the leadership doesn't do the right thing, that's where the problem is. So this is what we're up against. Bottom line.
Well, thank you very much, caller. Okay, the next caller, go ahead. Okay, caller, you have a comment for us today. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. This is Renee. Hi, everyone. Yeah.
I didn't hear what you say, caller. What did you say? Did we lose her? Okay. But Attorney Banks and Prime, my problem is that we keep getting misleading information and these attacks. And I watch some of the reels a lot of time, and the misinformation is so great And what is more disturbing to me is that so many people, particularly in our community, they're getting their news through these websites such as TikTok and things like that. And we're seeing these social media outlets promulgating false information. So they'll get this information, and so a media outlet that is controlled by China and Russia, and they think somehow it's the gospel. And so I think that one of the things that we have to do going forward is that we have to start having these voter town halls maybe in 2025 this year to get voter participation at a historic level in 2026 midterm election. I don't think that this is a process we could start in 2026. I think we got to start doing this in 2025 and then get participation level expanded.
That's absolutely true, Attorney Lee. And the NAACP has recognized that, and they have announced nationwide town hall meetings to help drive Black voter turnout for the 2026 midterms. And it may sound early, but it's not too early to begin the education effort and the mobilization of diverse voters ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. This will be a critical election. And the question in the midterms is whether or not we believe in democracy and the rule of law, or whether we desire to be ruled by a king.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you both, Attorney Lee and Attorney Banks, make excellent points. And one of the points that I would make is that there's a really important book that your listeners should be aware of. Isabel Wilkerson, she wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, which is really excellent book about the African-American migration. But the book that really kind of, encapsulates our conversation is her subsequent book called Caste. And what her argument is that there are a lot of natural alliance between, African Americans and our white brothers. And what has been done historically is trying to find ways to divide us. We all have an interest in making sure that, people are insured, that, our society is moving forward in employment. But unfortunately, what happens every election, as you all will recall, you remember the famous Jesse Helms ad where it makes it seem as though, there's white hands and he's tearing up a rejection letter and they're saying that he didn't get this job because of affirmative action, even though that's, furthest from the truth. So there's always been this push to divide us. And I think it just goes to the question of making sure that we're educated, because one of the key handbooks of any authoritarian government, that's where our country is headed, is making sure that there's a limit on available information. We saw that with Goebbels, we saw that with Viktor Orban, and we're seeing some of those same tendencies with this administration as well.
Well, it's terrible. And unfortunately, counselors, people believe that rhetoric. They see, and I see it on these reels every day. It is pathetic to me. And they have a couple of these young guys on these reels that are correcting this misinformation. It's amazing. I can't think of the name of the bloggers who does that, but the level of ignorance and lack of knowledge of the actual process is just amazing to me. Somehow people think that this type of government being run by a totalitarian regime is making us better off. Not paying attention to the fact that inflation is going up, unemployment is going up, minorities' rights are being evaded. We have militaries going into cities where you have Black mayors, and there's never been a talk of them, of the city run by white mayors. I think it's just racially motivated, it seems like, because now you're trying to show that this so-called crime wave is out of control. And so we see that, but the net result is, what I'm concerned about is voter suppression. We're trying to get people out to vote, but at the same time, we see a push to dissuade people from voting. I think people are getting so turned off about the process and the misinformation, and they say, well, we get conflicting information. And then I said, well, what's your source? Well, Fox News. Really? That's not news, that's entertainment.
It's not news at all. And I think your listeners should be aware they've been, one of the largest defamation cases in recent memory, almost $1 billion. There was a huge settlement because Fox News was providing misinformation, and your viewers should be aware of a website called Media Matters that also does a good job of flagging a lot of the misinformation that comes from Fox News. The final thing I'll say is that the misinformation out there, it's not by accident. Some of it's by design. There's a website called Prager University, and it's total misinformation, and it's from people that have white nationalist backgrounds, and they're putting out information about slavery, about Christopher Columbus. And a lot of that gets into your Twitter feeds and TikTok feeds, and it's totally, disingenuous, and it's not factual. So it's really important to ask the question that Attorney Lee asked, hey, what is your source? What is your primary source for this information? And that's where the NAACP meetings that Attorney Banks talked about can come in play in terms of educating people and making them understand a lot of the different disinformation that's out there.
That source, you say Prager University?
Yeah, it's called Prager, Prager U. And one of the commentators that's in the news because she's being sued for defamation, Candace Owens, it was just shameful. She was on there, really disparaging African Americans and the whole idea of slavery, and almost kind of blaming African Americans for it. I mean, it's that type of disinformation, or disinformation about Christopher Columbus. And, there's firsthand history regarding what he did and some of the massacres that occurred in his wake. So we really have to be careful of that. I think Media Matters is a really good source of really laying out a lot of the misinformation that's out there. But you really have to be careful about some of these websites. The other thing that I'll say is that Candace Owens is being sued now by the president of France and his wife, because she had a lot of misinformation, alleged misinformation about whether or not his wife was born a man or a woman. And it turns out that allegedly when President Macron and his team did an investigation, it found out that she had a lot of connections to Prager University, these white nationalist organizations, totalitarian governments. It's really disconcerting. So I would encourage your listeners to read that lawsuit, and that kind of gives you a bird's eye view of there are people that are out there that do not have our best interests at heart and are just spewing misinformation.
Well, Imhotep, you have a comment real quickly?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you, you all, make sure you understand that the DEI affirmative action wasn't just about qualified people who went to college. I know people who worked at Rolls-Royce, Chevrolet, and all that. Black people say when they first got their jobs in there was after these was passed, and that people didn't even want to train them on those jobs. So it was about access to all types of upward mobile work, not just highly professional work that me and you all may do. Just want to throw that in there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any final comment, Attorney Banks?
I would just encourage everybody to try to connect with one of the upcoming NAACP town hall meetings that will be taking place in the states of Texas, California, North Carolina, Ohio, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, New York, and Maryland. Those town halls are going to focus on national and local issues. They're going to promote civic engagement and the importance of being engaged in your community through recruiting volunteers, grassroots organizing, and just the importance of going door to door, knocking on doors. Those methods still work in order to get the vote out.
Attorney Primes.
Yes, I would just reiterate that and just remember that we've been through this before, and our forefathers, they brought forth a number of organizations. It's time to really redouble our efforts. Our Black fraternities and sororities, our Black national professional organizations. We need our Black churches. If you want to do something positive, get involved. Our HBCUs, donating money, being active in your church, active in your church committees, your fraternity sororities. These are things that can help, uplift our community. And they were things that were used in the past before the passage of the Civil Rights Acts that we've talked about. So we're really going to have to understand that we're in a very difficult time and use those tools that our forefathers have used, try to strengthen them to help us get through this difficult stretch.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Join us next week, and thank our VIP guests today and all our callers in. And join us next Saturday as we deal with new legal issues